Good afternoon. The Rules Committee will come to order. I want to thank everyone for joining us today as the committee meets to consider H.R. 899, the Unfunded Mandates Information Transparency Act. This common sense piece of legislation, authored by the Vice Chairman of the Rules Committee, the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Dr. Fox, takes meaningful steps to increase transparency in our federal regulatory process and to prevent burdensome unfunded mandates from slowing economic growth. Specifically, H.R. 899 amends the Unfunded Mandates Reform Act of 1995 to promote accountability in federal rulemaking by requiring the administration to disclose the true cost of new regulations, to consider less costly and burdensome alternatives, and to engage with private sector businesses in an effort to avoid unintended consequences. All too often, unnecessary and burdensome federal regulations prevent job creation and economic growth. And at a time when millions of Americans are looking for work, Congress needs to take action to try and help remedy the problem of red tape and bureaucracy. Congress needs to promote the free enterprise system by ensuring that the government works with the private sector, not against it. I want to thank each of you for being here today for this important hearing. And before we welcome our guests today, the gentleman from Maryland and the gentlewoman from North Carolina, I'd like to defer to the gentleman from Florida for any statement that he'd like to make. The gentleman, Judge Hastings, recognized. Thank you very much. By the way, Judge Hastings and I and all the committee want to welcome both of our important and distinguished visitors today who've come to the Rules Committee not only to present their ideas but also to talk about ways in which we can help streamline our federal government and make them, I think, more accountable to the American people. With that said, I recognize that the gentlewoman, Mrs. Fox, the Vice Chairman of the committee, normally sits on the dais, and I'm delighted that she is before us today. Virginia, I will tell you that this legislation I consider to be very important as a small businessman and also working for a large company. I saw firsthand some of the unfunded mandates that happen, and I know you're addressing great things for us. The gentlewoman is recognized for any statement she'd like to make, and without objection, anything she's got in writing will be entered to the record. The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for your comments, and I'm really privileged to be able to be here today to present this bill. And as you know, I consider it a privilege and honor to serve as Vice Chair of this committee, and I appreciate your support. H.R. 899, the Unfunded Mandates Information Transparency Act, is bipartisan legislation that improves the regulatory process and creates more certainty for job creators by providing a much-needed update to the 1995 Unfunded Mandates Reform Act. When enacted, UMRA was an essential new step to inform Congress of the potential burdens of these mandates on the state and local governments and the private sector so they could be weighed against the potential benefits. However, many burdensome unfunded mandates are slipping through the cracks, either because they're not identified by UMRA or the UMRA analyses do not fully capture the heavy burdens associated with regulatory mandates. Indeed, in the past 10 years, only 5 regulations issued by federal agencies were classified as an unfunded mandate on state and local governments. Further, only 11 of the 68 major regulations issued in FY 2012 were classified as an unfunded mandate. All the while, the regulatory state continues to grow. According to the administration's own estimates, major regulations in FY 2012 put more costs on the economy than all major regulations issued during the first terms of Presidents Bush and Clinton combined. H.R. 899 fills in the cracks in UMRA by closing loopholes to comprehensive regulatory analyses. H.R. 899 allows UMRA to capture more unfunded mandates by requiring independent regulatory agencies to comply with UMRA. Regulations imposed by independent regulatory agencies can be just as costly as other federal agencies, but agencies such as the Securities and Exchange Commission and the National Labor Relations Board have escaped comprehensive cost-benefit analyses of their regulations. H.R. 899 closes a loophole that allows an agency to forego an UMRA analysis if the agency never issued a notice of proposed rulemaking. This is important because the GAO reports that 35% of major rules are issued without a notice of proposed rulemaking. H.R. 899 adds accountability and extends judicial review to help ensure agencies carefully consider the least costly, least burdensome regulatory alternative. H.R. 899 ensures that federal agencies and the Congressional Budget Office estimate the entire cost of a federal mandate, such as foregone profits, costs passed on to consumers, and behavioral changes as a result of a federal mandate. This codifies current CBO practice and ensures agencies account for these costs. The legislation has the support of the National Federation of Independent Business, the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and the National Conference of State Legislatures. In fact, the text of the legislation was part of a regulatory reform package that passed the House on a bipartisan basis last Congress. And I'm very proud to say that H.R. 899 has bipartisan DNA. It codifies administrative fixes championed by Presidents Clinton and Obama and promotes good government, accountability, and transparency. A common refrain in this business is that nobody wants to see how sausage is made, meaning that the process of drafting and passing legislation is so ugly that it would repulse people. In this case, I disagree. I'm extremely proud of this bill, and I'm extremely proud of the process by which it has been advanced in the House. I'm especially grateful to my Democrat colleagues who've worked with us on the bill and support its passage. For all these reasons, I urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan common sense bill, and thank you for the opportunity to testify on its behalf.
I thank the gentlewoman not only for her testimony, but the hard work on the bill, and I look forward to having an opportunity to speak with her further. The Rules Committee today welcomes a very dear friend of mine, the gentleman from Maryland, the ranking member of the Government Reform Committee, Elijah Cummings. Mr. Cummings, I'm delighted that you are here, and will tell you that your friendship to me, and I hope mine to you over these years, has been good for you and me, but yes, I welcome your hard work that you have done, not only government reform, but also in this Congress, and you're a friend of the Rules Committee, and I'm delighted that you are here, sir. Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your kind words. I'm here, and I appreciate this opportunity to testify on 899, and I know my colleague has worked hard on this, and I can understand the objectives. Sometimes, unfortunately, there are unintended consequences that come from good objectives. Put simply, this legislation would erect a new and unnecessary barriers to slow down the regulatory process and give corporations an unfair advantage over ordinary Americans when new rules are made. And when I say ordinary Americans, I'm talking about the 700,000 people we each represent. Under this bill, private industry would have the opportunity to influence a proposed agency rule before it is made available to the public. Personally, I believe agencies should consult with industry on proposed rules. But private corporations should never be given an explicit and unfair preference over other stakeholders, particularly the American families and consumers that these rules are designed to protect. And I say that again. People that they are supposed to, rules, they're supposed to be for protection. I don't know, and we all don't know, what's happening with regard to, say, for example, the water in West Virginia. But it's quite possible there were some rules problems there. And we've got to, I think we have to really keep in mind what consequences will be. As I say in the Oversight Committee all the time, what we do up here or what we don't do up here has an effect on people. And as a matter of fact, we just had a hearing in my committee this morning on rules concerning devices, medical devices. And I told them about a mother who just died as a result of what we think was a medical device improperly used, and left two twins, saw them for 5 minutes, and then she went into a coma and died. So they do have consequences, and they're for protection. This bill also would expand the judicial review provision in the Unfunded Mandates Reform Act to allow private industry to tie up rulemakings endlessly in new litigation and second-guess the expertise of agencies in analyzing the impact of a rule. H.R. 899 would repeal an existing provision of law that exempts independent regulatory agencies from the reporting requirements of UMBRA. Now, let's talk about that for a moment. As a result, the independence of agencies like the Securities Exchange Commission and the Consumer Product Safety Commission would be compromised because the Office of Management and Budget would now have a role in shaping the rules those agencies issue. I've submitted an amendment that would strike this provision of the bill, and I urge the committee to make it in order. I also urge the committee to adopt an open rule for H.R. 899. If the committee instead chooses to adopt a structured rule, I would ask that the committee make as many amendments in order as possible to allow members to adequately debate both the intended and unintended consequences of the bill. The bottom line is that regulations save lives, protect health and safety of hundreds of millions of Americans, and provide protections that are critical to the functioning of a healthy society. In our committee, Oversight and Government Reform, we constantly hear, Mr. Chairman, and Chairman Slaughter, Ranking Member Slaughter, about how regulations are stopping folks from creating jobs. Well, it's one thing to have a job. It's another thing to have a job if you don't have regulations connected with it. I often talk about as a young boy how, Mr. Chairman, I worked at Bethlehem Steel. And when you would go to Bethlehem Steel, if you were on Bethlehem Steel's grounds for 20 minutes, if you blew your nose, you saw black or red mucus come out for 20 minutes. And they subsequently changed the rules to make sure you had to have a mask on. But there are men whose funerals I've gone to have died. And if those rules were not in place, so many of them would, if they were in place, they would probably still be here. And so I want to make, I'm just saying, Mr. Chairman, this is about an amendment. We're just trying to make sure it's probably a fine bill, but this is just an opportunity to offer an amendment, and we just ask that we be granted that opportunity. And I'll yield back.
Mr. Cummings, thank you very much. I've not run for president, but I've watched a lot of people who have done so. And it seems like every single person running for president sets an idea that they want to reduce the federal government's footprint on everybody and make it easier for the free enterprise system to work, easier for people to have a chance to be safe. Yes, I don't think anybody's talking about doing away with all the rules, but rather a balance, a careful balance. And we heard testimony now that President Obama has had more rules in 5 years than what it took 2 presidents in 16 years to promulgate in rules. Mrs. Fox, what is it about these administrations that you see, why they do these things? And do you think your legislation is going to help that or stop something?
Well, Mr. Chairman, let me say, and the ranking member almost alluded to this is not an anti-rule bill. It's not an anti-rule bill. We are not advocating stopping doing rules, What we want is for there to be transparency in the rules and accountability. He mentioned that this would make it harder for the federal government to pass rules. Well, this bill is not doing that. This simply builds on the success of the original UMBRA, which, by the way, has not been modified since 1995, which is pretty remarkable, by expanding its public disclosure provisions into more regulatory actions and closing loopholes that have surfaced in the 15 years since UMBRA was initiated. So it's a good government bill, again, enhancing transparency and accountability, not trying to create more obstacles for federally unfunded mandates. He also mentioned that it should not be covering the independent agencies. And I believe he said that it would overturn a part of UMBRA that exempts the regulatory agencies. Well, those regulatory agencies, UMBRA's silent on the regulatory agencies. And since UMBRA was passed, we've had a lot of rules come out of the regulatory agencies, and they're not complying with UMBRA. We believe that they should. The other thing that I should say is the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs is already located within OMB. And so this would simply improve transparency and accountability by codifying the current practice there. I hope that's answered your questions.
In fact, it does. I think what you've said is that you're trying to help a process, you're trying to balance a process, you're trying to provide transparency to a process. Throughout my years, have spent a lot of time with the Boy Scouts of America. And the Boy Scouts of America spend a lot of time in training and teaching people and preparing our training with the expectation of what the outcome would be and what the time that would take and what you're supposed to learn and a lot of those things. And I found when I was in private sector that many times they were rules and regulations without necessarily something that you understood why. I recall as a young guy when I was an installer repairman for Southwestern Bell AT&T, Southwestern Bell Telephone Company in El Paso, Texas, that when you back up, your truck would make a noise, and then the noise was so loud people had to put earphones on, ear sets on, and then they couldn't hear that, so they had to make the decibels louder. And I remember, however, knowing as onerous or as obnoxious as the rule was, it was there for a reason, and it made sense. And I think that now more than ever, it makes sense in a difficult time for us to have, as Mrs. Fox says, the transparency to make sure that what we do is balanced and that people understand the expectation of performance. I want to thank both of you for being here today, and I would now yield the time to the gentleman from Utah. The gentleman's recognized. The gentleman has no questions. Gentlewoman from New York.
Well, I don't have any questions either, Mr. Chairman. I would like to make a statement. I know we spend a lot of time up here saying that we're overregulated and regulations are hurting the economy, although there are studies that show that's absolutely not true. But what I keep thinking about is the fact, little town of West Texas that blew to bits when a fertilizer factory blew up. It hadn't been inspected for 23 years. And I keep thinking about the people of West Virginia who had this spill into their river, polluting all their drinking water and all the water they had to use. This tank that had ruptured had not been tested for over 20 years. They didn't even know what was in it. As a matter of fact, I think a couple weeks after they told the people of West Virginia it would be just fine for them to drink the water, they discovered formaldehyde that people had been drinking. And then North Carolina, which is a state I've always loved because that's the state of my father, where Duke Power poured massive amounts of toxic waste, slag waste, into the river, polluting the water again. I've said it before, and I feel like I have to say it again, that every drop of water on this earth we will ever have has been here since the beginning of time. We can't create any of it. And the sort of rule of thumb about how long one can survive without fresh water to drink, is 4 to 5 days. And we talk about pipelines and fracking and everything else in the world. We have no concern whatever about whether we can drink. So it troubles me. I know this won't go anywhere in the Senate, and once again, we have a week of one-house bills, but we have to do something. So I just have to say that regulations, as far as I'm concerned, I came out of coal mine area, and I remember those whistles in the middle of the night when there was a disaster at the mine, and how little regulation there was over what happened to those men who went down into those pits. I remember so many times that the government had to step in with in Harlan County when we would have terrible epidemics of scarlet fever and numbers of other diseases without much health care. Regulations have meant a great deal to all of us, and I think we've all benefited immensely from them. And the idea that they are our enemy and that they are destroying this economy is purely hogwash. Thank you.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief, but I just wanted to ask, I know the gentlelady from North Carolina has North Carolina in her heart as well. Is there anything in your legislation that you hope will make it harder to protect coal miners in your part of the world?
Absolutely not.
Is there anything in this bill that you hope makes it harder to protect clean water in West Virginia?
Absolutely not.
Is there anything in your bill that you hope will make it harder to prevent disasters like what we saw in West Texas?
Absolutely not.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'd be happy to yield to my friend.
I'll tell you what would help is inspection, some regulation. That neither of those things would, and none of that I mentioned would have happened if the regulations had been complied with and they were really there.
I take the gentlelady's point. I think that's absolutely right.
Gentleman yield.
I'd be happy to yield, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I am not an expert on it, but I believe that what happened in West Texas was the fire was further along than people knew it was. And it was actually unreported. It's not that they did not recognize what they have or not because they were not.
The gentleman yield?
I will.
It was an absolute fact that it had not been inspected for over 20 years, 23 if I
Well,
remember.
and I appreciate that, and I don't know who was supposed to inspect them, but
what caused that fire and save those people's lives and
Well,
property.
what happened is the fire department did know what was in there.
Very nice.
They knew exactly what was in there. It was you can.
The same kind of thing that blew up.
Yes, ma'am. What happened is the fire was going on longer than what they knew. And that was what the problem. You could inspect it all day long, but you normally don't expect it when there's a fire going on. It just got further along than what they thought they did. It was a tragedy. It was just south of where I live, and a number of Dallas firefighters were killed in that. But that's what happened. I don't know that it's because of regulations or not, but I do know it's because the fire was further along than what they thought. I thank the gentleman.
We know it hasn't been inspected.
Well,
I appreciate
it always surprises
May
me,
go back right
the things that we end up disagreeing about. The ranking member referenced a hearing we had in Oversight and Government Reform this morning, and it was a hearing we had because the FDA plays a literally life and death role on both ends of the spectrum. If they don't approve things fast enough, folks die. And if they approve things too quickly, folks die. I mean, it's critically important. And what I so appreciate, Ms. Fox, about the legislation, I have to point out that UMRA is, of course, the original jurisdiction of the Legislative Process Subcommittee, one of the few things that we play a role on the Rules Committee in making sure works, is that I don't want to believe that more information could possibly be wrong. The ranking member referenced lawsuits and the power of corporations to litigate a regulation out of existence. Candidly, I'm sympathetic to him. I don't want to see that happen in the same way that I have highways and dams and bridges that get litigated out of existence on the other side. I mean, there has to be a common sense place that we come together on the not just the need for regulation, but the desirability of doing it and doing it properly, and having that accounting. I think about mass transit, Ms. Fox. You and I are down in the southeastern United States. I get one Amtrak train a day through the city of Atlanta, largest city in the southeastern United States. I get one train a day. If I want to go to Savannah, which is 150 miles to the east, I have to go north to Richmond 9 hours and then come back down south 10 hours. We build roads like they're going out of style, and folks don't have any idea what the subsidy for a road is, but we talk all the time about what the subsidy for mass transit is. Whether we are trying to get an accounting of the burden on business, as you suggest, I would join Mr. Cummings in trying to get an accounting on the burden on families. I can't imagine that you're trying to exclude an analysis of the burden on families. It's just arguably more difficult to get our arms around, but the more information, the better, because at the end of the day, I don't know a single mom or dad that wants to see a single bad thing happen to their kid or anybody else's, but it is a cost-benefit analysis every single day. The families in my district, I know a lot of them, want organic food for the kids. They can't afford organic food for the kids, and they've got to make that cost-benefit decision. We so often make that decision on their behalf, hopefully with good information. And to the ranking member's point, whether we're gathering more information on the business side or more information on the consumer side, I just don't know how any of us could or should be threatened by more information, provided that, to the caution the ranking member suggested, we don't delay something right out of existence. I'd be happy to yield to ranking member.
Thank you very much. I guess maybe I'm missing something, but it seems like with this legislation, industry now gets to see the legislation, be a part of it before the 700,000 people that you represent. I mean, Don, it just seems to me that the people that sent us here, they sent us here, and they want to be protected. You know, I guess, you know, when you're dead, you're dead. And when people die, you know, you feel sorry for them and all that. But the fact is that there are things that we could do to prevent that. And you just talked about cost benefit. A lot of times, the benefit is not measured in a balanced way with regard to cost. But a life is valuable. Health is valuable. Wellness is valuable. And to the ranking member's comments, before you came in, I referenced the West Virginia situation. I tell my staff that a lot of times some of the greatest advocates for any issue are people who have suffered pain. Their pain is turned into a passion, and then they come upon the earth finally to do their purpose. And I hate for people, I had some people today that came to me and was talking about AIDS. Well-dressed gentleman, and he was just, I mean, just an example of what I'm just saying real quick. And I said, how'd you get involved in this? He said, you know, I never thought I'd be advocating for AIDS until my son died from AIDS. What I'm saying is I don't want a situation where people have to die first. And it seems to me like this legislation gives industry is about, I know there are a lot of great industries, but they're looking at costs. I understand that. And so when you give them a bite of the apple before anybody, before your own constituents, you know, that's my concern with the legislation. But at the same time, we have an opportunity through this wonderful committee to allow amendments to go forth for 435 members of us, for all of us, to make decisions to try to create that balance. Because I respect my colleagues' opinion, I respect yours, and we may differ, but let's have an opportunity to vote on this so we can share those differences and hopefully reach that balance.
I hope we can have a robust debate. I know the chairman always encourages that as well. But what I see is you obviously see an advantage of industry. What I heard Ms. Fox say, and I want to make sure I heard you properly, you said something like 85% of regulations come out or arrive with no notice of proposed rulemaking in there. And so it's not just that businesses... 35. That it wasn't just, it's not just that employers don't get a shot at it, but my constituents don't get a shot at it either. I have no interest in an unlevel playing field, putting business above the interest of the folks who run this country, the citizens, absolutely none. But I have a hugely vested interest in making sure the priorities of our communities are placed above the priorities of government, because those priorities should be flowing from our communities, not flowing to our communities. And my understanding is that's, again, not stopping anything, but just including folks in the process.
That's right. And what I said was 35% of the rules get issued without any, go through the loophole that has been developed. But I want to say, and I meant to mention this earlier, Mr. Cummings' implication is that we're giving business and corporations unfair advantage. But there's no reason why corporations and other business interests or the private sector entity who are stakeholders affected by federal mandates should not have the same opportunities to participate in rulemaking as state, local, tribal governments have now under UMRA. And to make it look like they're having an unfair advantage is just simply not true. And I want to say, I know that we have businesses that make mistakes and that don't look after the best interest of the people who work for them, but they're few and far between. They're few and far between. Most businesses, and I visit a lot of businesses, I was in business myself, most business people lie awake at night worrying about how they are going to provide jobs, how they're going to get revenue, how they're going to make their workplace safe for the people who work for them. They have a vested interest in doing things right, not a vested interest in doing things wrong. And to take the attitude that they're all evil and only want to do bad things and skirt rules and regulations is just not my experience at all. And so I don't think this gives them an unfair advantage at all. I want to represent my constituents very well, but I believe those people in business and industry want to represent their constituents too. And so it's not an unfair advantage.
I've got to answer what she just said.
Please, sir.
I am. You will never hear me say a business is evil, because I don't believe. I ran a business. I ran a law firm for 20-some years, and I know what it is to run a business. And I know what you're talking about, lying awake, trying to make sure that my employees were covered with insurance, dealing with IRS, dealing with state government, dealing with banks. I know it. I know what it feels like to wait for customers to come in the door, clients to come in the door, so that we could feed our families. I got that. All I'm saying is I'm going back to what you said, making sure that there's a fair balance here. I just want to make sure that the constituents that sent us here, the ones that you saw in the grocery store this weekend, at the gas station, I want to make sure that they have a fair voice in all this process. That's all I'm saying. I will never allow anybody to say that I think business is evil. Never.
It is certainly true that the implication often is in the more regulation, less regulation discussion that somehow folks who are not acting in the public interest need more regulation, and that somehow if you have a profit motive that somehow overwhelms your value system that you bring to the table as a human being. Certainly you didn't let that happen in your law firm. Certainly that does not happen in the community-based businesses that Ms. Fox is talking about. If we all agreed on it, we'd have done this a long time ago, and it probably wouldn't be worth doing. I'm glad we're bringing controversial things forward. And Ms. Fox, we pay a lot of lip service to bringing people together, to building consensus. I look at your legislation. You brought you from one end of North Carolina and Mr. McIntyre from the other. You brought Jim Lankford out of Oklahoma on one end of the conservative spectrum to Loretta Sanchez on the other. You're not just paying lip service to bringing people together. You've done it here in this piece of legislation. I'm glad we're moving it forward today. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. It's time. Gentleman of Massachusetts recognized. Gentleman does not have any questions. Chairman Cole, would you like for it to be recognized? Gentleman from Florida is recognized. Mr. Nugent. Gentleman does not seek time. Judge Hastings?
Chairman, I'm going to, I understand manage the rules, so I'll have what I have to say on it.
You're loaded for bear already, aren't you? Just loaded for bear. Mr. Polis, do you have any questions of our distinguished guests who are before us today? Mr. Webster? Ms. Roslane? Dr. Burgess recognized.
Just an observation. We spent 4.5 hours earlier today in Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Health dealing with a new rule that was just put forward by Health and Human Services, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, 700 pages, redacting the 6 protected classes of drugs in the Medicare Part D program. This is an important part of our oversight. We need this tool in our arsenal. We need to be able to protect the citizens that we were sent here to protect, and I'll yield back.
Chairman yields back his time. I want to thank both of you. I will be honest, you and I have been friends for many years, as Mrs. Fox and I have been too, and I appreciate your advocacy, your strength of character, your demeanor before this committee, and you've brought on to us today, and I thank you very much, and it's my hope that you'll want to come back and see us, Elijah. Mrs. Fox is stuck here on a regular basis.
Mr. Chairman, may I just say this, Chairman? Mr. Chairman, I've seen the results. I've lived it. I've seen it of when the regulations are not there. I've experienced it, all right? In my family, in my neighborhoods, I see it.
Yes, sir.
And so when you have felt it, you realize, and then I finally got here, where we can make sure that people are protected and that it can stay alive and be all that God meant for them to be. That's my job. And so I just want to make sure we're clear that, again, I bring to this experience not only a businessman, but also a citizen. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much to both of you. You're now excused, and thank you very much. This closes the hearing portion of our H.R. 899 Unfunded Mandates Information Transparency Act of 2013. And the committee will now be in receipt of a motion from the gentleman from Utah.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 899, the Unfunded Mandates Information Transparency Act of 2013, a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking member of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill should be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against the provisions in the bill. The rule makes in order only those amendments printed in the committee rules report, the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, should be considered as read, should be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and opponent, shall not be subject to an amendment, shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendment printed in the report. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. So moved.
You've now heard the motion on behalf of the committee and the gentleman from Utah. I'd like to take just a second to explain the rule. The rule provides a structured process for H.R. 899, the Unfunded Mandates Information Transparency Act of 2013. It's 1 hour general debate. It makes in order all amendments that were submitted to the Rules Committee. Those were 3 Democratic amendments and 1 motion to recommit. We now would stand ready for any amendment or discussion. Seeing none, the vote will now be on the motion by the gentleman from Utah. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. Roll call.
Ms. Fox. Yay. Ms. Fox, aye. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, aye. Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Nugent. Mr. Nugent, aye. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, aye. Ms. Ross-Lehtinen. Aye. Ms. Ross-Lehtinen, aye. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, aye. Ms. Slaughter. No. Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern. Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis?
No.
Mr. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report total.
9 yeas, 4 nays.
Motion is agreed to. Motion is agreed to, and the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Dr. Fox, will be managing rule for the Republicans. And Judge Hastings will be for the minority. There are no additional meetings expected this week. And before we get out of here today, Louise, I want to say that I have a small gift for you. And it's a picture. The committee had not had a picture, a formal picture made since 1979. And I wanted to make sure that you got this. Well, look at Dr. Boy, doesn't he look great?
Good work.
Yeah. But it's a modern era picture, and you're in there, and you look awesome.
Well,
I'd take it home and see what Bob says.
yeah, okay.
I mean, he's bound to have an opinion.
Thank you very, very much.
Well, I provided a copy of each of these to our members. I even wrote Alcee a note and told him how awesome he is.
Yeah?
And
Well, he looks like a tree full of owls in there. He's wise as I'll get.
just every bit of it is there. But I wanted to thank the members and acknowledge we had to get rid of that 1979 photograph. Is there any other business? Anybody have business before the committee? We're through with our business for the week. Yes, sir. You know, I don't want to say look at those pictures. You have to get a big picture to be able to see.